The sticker was the first thing that felt wrong, because it looked like it had been placed for my eyes alone. It was the size of a thumbnail, a dull silver square on a fire door at the end of a service corridor. In the center was a simple symbol cut into the foil, like a circle that never quite closed, with 3 tiny dots inside it. It caught the light from the high windows and flashed even when I moved my head only a little, like it was tracking me. I'd been given a paper map and a plastic access card and a short job description that sounded harmless. I was a contracted courier for a regional depot, mostly handling overflow. That day I'd been told to go into a new annex, find a cold chain cage, and swap a data logger. The device was supposed to be retrieved and returned to dispatch by noon, because the client wanted the readout the same day. It was harsh midday outside, too bright for December, that flat winter light that makes every surface feel exposed. The annex was attached to the rail depot like a second thought, a long box of gray panels with tall windows near the ceiling. I remember being grateful for the daylight, like it could keep things honest. The corridor leading to the fire door was narrow and clean, painted the kind of off-white that tries to feel neutral. I could smell fresh caulk and new rubber. My footsteps were small and precise on the sealed floor, and the air had that dry, filtered chill of a building that doesn't want any surprises. On my map, the fire door was marked as the only entrance to the cage room. The sticker wasn't on the map. It wasn't mentioned in the job notes. It just sat there on the painted metal like a decision someone had made and never explained. I stood close enough to see the edges lifting where the foil met the paint. The symbol wasn't printed. It was a cutout, as if the sticker had been punched and peeled. In the right angle of light, it wasn't a circle at all. It was more like a ring that had been forced apart, and then pressed back together without aligning. I told myself it was just a vendor mark. A quick label to show a door had been serviced. I pressed my thumb against it anyway. The foil was colder than it should have been. I swiped my access card, heard the lock click, and pulled the door open. The first undeniable distortion was simple. It wasn't a phantom, or a shadow, or a flicker of something at the edge of my sight. It was the room on the other side. According to the map, there should have been a cage area with a mesh fence, a refrigeration unit, and an alarm strobe. What I opened onto was another corridor, identical to the one I was standing in, running straight ahead with the same sealed floor, and the same high windows throwing pale rectangles across the walls. For a few seconds I assumed I had misread the map. Then I looked back. The fire door behind me was still there, open, showing the annex corridor I'd walked down. I could see the overhead conduit, the numbered tags, the scuff on the baseboard I'd noticed without thinking. Ahead of me, the second corridor had the same scuff on the baseboard. It was in the same spot, the same shape, like a little bite out of the paint. I stepped across the threshold, because that was what the job demanded, and also because my brain refused to accept the alternative. The air on the far side was colder by a degree, enough to tighten the skin on my face. My breath didn't fog, but it felt like it should have. The door swung on its closer and settled behind me with a soft, deliberate hiss. The corridor in front of me was quiet in a way that didn't fit a working depot. Even on a holiday lull, you hear something. Motors. Fans. A distant slam. Here, there was only the faint pressure of air moving through ducts, and even that seemed to hold back, as if listening. I checked my phone. It had signal, a weak bar, and the time was still late morning. My messages loaded slowly, but they loaded. That should have been enough to make me laugh at myself and keep walking. But the paper map in my hand had changed. I don't mean I suddenly noticed a detail I'd missed. I mean the corridor I stood in was now printed on the map, in thin blue lines that hadn't been there 5 minutes ago. The fire door I'd come through was still marked, but the room beyond it was no longer labeled as a cage area. It was labeled as a passage. I kept my fingers on the paper like I could pin it to reality. Halfway down the corridor, a motion sensor clicked and a section of overhead lights came on, even though daylight was already pouring in from the windows. The additional light didn't brighten the space so much as flatten it. It took away the soft shadows that let you judge distance. The walls looked closer. The far end of the corridor looked farther. My practical goal was still simple. Find cage C7, remove the logger, install the replacement, confirm its reading, and leave. The replacement device was in my bag, sealed in a tamper pouch. The one I needed to retrieve would be mounted inside the cage, usually in a clip on the mesh. I walked until I reached an intersection that wasn't on the original layout of the annex, but was now on the map. A sign hung from the ceiling with arrows and icons. I didn't read the text. I only registered that the sign was clean, unscuffed, like it had been installed yesterday, and that one corner of it had the same silver sticker with the cut circle and 3 dots. The sticker was placed so you'd see it when you looked up. I turned in the direction the map suggested. The new corridor was wider, and I began to hear a sound, very faint, like a conveyor belt far away. It came and went, not in a steady rhythm, but as if something were starting and stopping in response to my movement. A door on the left had a small window. Through it I saw a room with metal shelving and plastic bins. On one shelf sat a handheld scanner, the kind we use for parcel sorting. It was on its side like it had been dropped. Its screen was dark. Next to it was a half-empty water bottle without a label. That should have been normal. People forget things all the time. What made my throat tighten was the dust. The room looked unused. The bins were clean. There were no footprints on the floor. But the water bottle had a ring of dried condensation around it, and the scanner had a smear where a hand must have touched it. Recent, intimate marks on an untouched space. I knocked once on the door with my knuckle, light, as if I might startle someone inside. There was no response. I pressed the handle. Locked. I kept walking. The conveyor sound grew clearer and then faded again, as if the building didn't want me to find its source. I passed another fire door, another access panel, another ceiling sign. Each one had the sticker somewhere in my line of sight. Not a lot of them. Just enough to feel like a pattern you weren't meant to ignore. At a second intersection, the corridor ended in a security vestibule. Behind glass was a small office with 2 monitors, a desk, and a chair pushed back as if someone had stood up quickly. A radio sat in its cradle. A little green indicator light glowed on the base. The office looked like safety. It had the right shape. It had the right clutter. It made me think of people, of procedure, of someone who could tell me I'd taken a wrong turn. The office door was unlocked. I went in and let it close behind me. The air was warmer in there, human warm, but stale, like it had been sealed for hours. On the desk was a printed checklist. I glanced at it and saw the same symbol in a corner, not as a sticker this time, but as a faint watermark. The lines on the page were blurred, as if the printer had been running low on ink. I didn't read the items. I didn't want to anchor my attention to text and give the room more authority than it deserved. One monitor showed a layout of the annex. It was a simple floor plan with the dot labeled as a badge ID. The dot was me, moving in real time. That should have been reassuring. What wasn't reassuring was that the dot was not in the room I was standing in. It hovered in a corridor adjacent to the office, a corridor that did not exist on the side of the glass wall. The monitor insisted there was another hallway there. The wall insisted there wasn't. The radio cracked once, a single burst of static, and then quiet again. I lifted the handset and listened. No voices. Just the faint hiss of an open channel. I set it back down carefully, like the wrong sound might wake something. I left the office and walked along the corridor the monitor claimed was beside it, half expecting the wall to turn into a doorway if I looked at it long enough. It stayed a wall. Smooth paint, clean corners, no seam. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The vibration was a normal notification pulse, a familiar little jolt that should have anchored me. When I pulled it out, there was no new message. The screen was dark again. The buzz had been empty. That was when I first noticed that the building seemed to be using my own expectations against me. It offered me the shape of normality, and then withdrew the substance. I checked the map again. The paper was now covered in more blue lines, more corridors branching like veins. My original route was still there, but it was faint, as if printed beneath the newer editions. The cage room, which had been a simple square on the first map, was now a long rectangle labeled with a different designation. I told myself the map was wrong. I told myself it was a misprint, a bad handout. But my hands kept returning to it like a compass. The conveyor sound returned, closer now, and with it a faint rhythmic thud, like something heavy being moved in slow cycles. It sounded like pallets settling on rollers. It sounded like a process. I followed it. The corridor opened into a space that was not part of any annex I'd ever seen. It was a sorting hall, but not the kind built for people. The ceiling was higher than it needed to be. The windows were gone. The air was colder. Conveyor belts ran in clean lines between tall mesh cages, each cage sealed with a metal clip. Above them, on a rail, hung hooks like the kind used for hanging tools or maybe hanging something else, and they were all empty. The hall was lit evenly, without shadows. It made my depth perception feel unreliable, like I was in a photograph. I walked between the cages and looked for labels. I expected to see barcodes or printed numbers. Instead, each cage had a small silver sticker on the mesh, near the clip, the same cut circle and 3 dots. Some cages had multiple stickers, placed like tally marks. My chest tightened around my breath. I tried to slow it down. I tried to keep my movements measured, because sudden motions made the conveyor sound change, as if the building noticed the speed of my panic. I found a cage with a familiar type of latch and a small temperature display mounted inside. It was dark. I leaned closer and realized there was no display. It was a blank plastic housing, like a fake device installed to satisfy a checklist. Inside the cage, on the floor, was a courier bag like mine. Black nylon, reflective strip, company patch half torn off. It lay open. The tamper pouch inside was empty, crumpled like a discarded skin. I didn't touch it. I looked around instead, trying to see if anyone was working, if there were cameras, if there was a forklift parked somewhere. The hall was empty of people and tools. It felt paused between operations. Something scraped softly from the far end of the hall. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was the sound of mesh shifting against metal, as if a cage door was being tested by a hand that knew how to be quiet. I stood very still. The scraping stopped. The conveyor belts remained silent. The air ducts continued their restrained breath. I told myself that a loose panel had settled. I told myself that new buildings make noises. Then I saw the movement that made my stomach drop, not because it was fast, but because it was slow enough to be certain. A cage door on the far side of the hall swung inward a few inches and then eased back, as if something inside had leaned on it and then pulled away. There was no one inside the cage that I could see. The mesh made a grid of shadows. The even lighting should have shown everything. The cage looked empty. I backed away, keeping my eyes on that cage, not wanting to turn my back on the possibility of someone trapped, or something pretending to be someone. My heel bumped a low wheel stop. The soft impact echoed in the hall like a dropped tool. The sound traveled farther than it should have. In the silence after, the scraping resumed, closer this time, not from the cage, but from somewhere behind the mesh to my left. I didn't think. I moved. I walked quickly at first, then faster, then broke into a run without deciding to. The hall swallowed my footfalls and then threw them back at me from different angles. Every corridor I entered seemed to produce a delayed copy of my own steps, like someone following at a distance that kept changing. I ran through an opening between cages and found a side corridor with a door marked as an equipment closet. It was half open. I slipped inside and pulled it shut until the latch caught. The closet smelled of cardboard and cold metal. It was cramped, with stacked boxes and hanging safety vests that brushed my face. I crouched behind a pile of folded tarps and tried to breathe through my nose, quiet, controlled. Outside, in the corridor, something moved. It wasn't a heavy footstep. It wasn't a person walking in boots. It was a soft pressure change, like air being displaced slowly, followed by a faint ticking sound that reminded me of a scanner trying to read a barcode. Tick. Pause. Tick. The ticks came closer, then stopped directly outside the closet door. The handle did not turn. The latch did not rattle. The door did not flex. The thing outside didn't test the obvious. It waited. In the waiting, I became aware of a small sound inside the closet, near my knee. A faint electronic chirp, once, like a device confirming a wake state. I looked down and saw a data logger on the floor, the same model I carried in my bag, with its tiny LED blinking steadily. I hadn't noticed it when I came in. I couldn't tell if it had been there already or if it had fallen from a shelf. It blinked at a calm interval, one pulse every few seconds like a heartbeat. On its casing was the silver sticker, the cut circle and 3 dots. My mouth went dry. I didn't touch it. I didn't want my fingerprints on it. I didn't want to be connected to it in any way the building could interpret. The ticking outside resumed, quieter now, not closer, not farther. It was as if the corridor itself was producing the sound, searching without needing to move. Then it stopped, and the silence that followed felt like a decision. I waited for the next sound, the next cue, the next proof of presence. Nothing came. Minutes passed in small, careful breaths. My legs cramped from holding a crouch. The tarp smelled faintly of chemical treatment, the kind used to resist fire, and that smell became a thin rope I held onto, because it was real. Eventually I heard the conveyor sound again, very faint, somewhere deeper in the building. It didn't sound like it was starting up. It sounded like it had never stopped, like I had simply lost the ability to hear it for a while. I eased the closet door open a fraction and looked out. The corridor was empty. I stepped out, closed the door quietly behind me, and forced myself to walk rather than run. Running had made the building respond. Walking felt like the only way to keep my presence small. I checked my bag. The replacement logger was still in the tamper pouch. The pouch seal was intact. I felt relief so sharp it almost hurt, and then immediately felt foolish for needing it. I returned to the sorting hall by a different corridor than the one I'd entered. It should have taken me to another section of the annex, maybe a loading bay. Instead, it led me back to the same row of cages, the same empty hooks overhead, the same light without shadows. The cage that had moved earlier was closed now. The mesh doors sat perfectly aligned, clip untouched. If I hadn't seen it swing, I would have doubted my memory. I focused on my task like a mantra. Find cage C7. Swap logger. Leave. I found a printed number plate on a cage corner, small and clean, and felt a rush of gratitude. C5. So the cages did have numbers. The system had enough kindness to let things be labeled. On C6, the number plate was there, but scratched lightly, as if someone had tried to peel it off with a key. On C7, the number plate was missing. In its place was the sticker symbol, larger than the others, as if it were the real identifier all along. I approached slowly, scanning the mesh. Inside, mounted on the inner wall, was the logger I needed to retrieve. It was clipped in place, its screen showing a temperature reading. The digits were steady. The device looked normal, down to the tiny scuff on the casing. Below it, on the floor of the cage, was something that made my stomach drop in a different way. A printed map. My map. It was folded the same way, creased in the same places, with the same smudge on the corner where my thumb had rubbed it. It lay inside the cage like something that had been deposited there as evidence. I leaned closer to the mesh, unable to stop myself. Through the grid, I could see the map's blue lines. They were more complex than mine now. The corridors were dense, overlapping, as if the building had been sketched and resketched until it became a knot. And in the corner, where my company logo should have been, was the cut circle and 3 dots. Not a sticker. Printed into the paper like it had always been there. My hands started to shake. I put them against my thighs to still them. I needed to open the cage. The latch was a standard clip with a secondary seal. I had a cutter in my kit for seals. My job required it. The clip was cold when I touched it, colder than the metal around it, like the sticker had been. I cut the seal, lifted the clip, and pulled the mesh door open. The sound it made was too loud. A long scrape, a metallic groan. It echoed into the high ceiling and seemed to hang there, vibrating. I reached inside and unclipped the logger. It came away easily. I held it in my palm and felt the faint warmth of its battery, a small, human-like heat. The screen remained steady. It didn't flash an alarm. It didn't show a warning. It just recorded. I didn't reach for the map inside the cage. I didn't want to touch it. I didn't want to accept it as mine. I backed away with the logger in hand and set the replacement device in its place. As soon as I clipped the new logger onto the mesh, it chirped softly. I froze. The chirp was small, normal, the kind of sound you'd barely notice in a busy room. In the silent hall it sounded like an announcement. The conveyor belts began to move. Not all of them. Just the one directly behind me, a low belt that ran along the aisle, carrying nothing. It began to roll with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like the building had been waiting for that exact moment to resume. Above, one of the empty hooks on the rails slid a few inches along its track and then stopped. The movement was tiny, almost delicate. But it made the metal ring faintly, and the ring traveled down the aisle like a tuning fork. I closed the cage door quickly, clipped it shut, and tried to reattach the seal. My hands were clumsy. The plastic strip shook. I dropped it once and had to pick it up off the floor. The new logger inside the cage blinked its LED, steady, patient. I put the retrieved logger in my bag and stepped away from the cage row. My plan was to leave immediately. Get back to the annex corridor, get outside into the honest daylight, deliver the device, and let someone else explain why an annex had a hall that wasn't on any public plan. I walked briskly toward what I thought was the exit. The corridor I took should have led back to the security office. It led instead to another sorting aisle, identical to the first, with cages and empty hooks and silent belts. The lighting was the same. The sticker symbols were the same. The air was the same dry cold. I stopped and looked back. The corridor behind me was straight and clean, and for a moment it looked like it could lead anywhere. But when I turned again, the row of cages in front of me was C5. The number plate, clean and small. I had come back to the same place without realizing it. My skin prickled along my arms. I didn't run. I forced myself to walk out of the aisle and pick another corridor, and then another. Each choice felt like it should be a new path. Each one folded back, gently, into the same hall. After the third loop, I started to notice differences that made it worse. A water bottle near a door that hadn't been there before. A glove on the floor, palm up, stiff with dried salt. A safety vest draped over a cage corner, as if someone had taken it off in a hurry. Traces accumulating like the building was adding evidence with each pass. On my fourth loop, I heard a voice. Not a clear voice. Not words. A muffled sound like someone speaking through a wall, the cadence of a person trying to communicate. It came from the direction of the security office, or what I thought was the security office. The tone rose and fell with urgency, then cut off abruptly, as if the air itself had been turned off. I followed it without thinking, because the sound of a person is a powerful thing when you've been alone with machines. The corridor narrowed and the air warmed slightly. I saw the glass wall of the office ahead, and for a second relief made my eyes sting. Then I saw that the chair behind the desk was not just pushed back. It was tipped over. The radio was off its cradle, lying face down. One of the monitors showed the floor plan again, and the dot labeled as my badge ID was still moving. There was also another dot. It hovered in the office itself, perfectly still. I approached the glass, peering in, expecting to see someone slumped below the desk or hiding in the corner. The office was empty. The dot remained fixed in place like a trapped insect on the screen. On the desk, next to the checklist, was a small silver sticker that hadn't been there the first time. It was placed right beside the radio, like a stamp. I didn't go inside. I backed away. I felt the building watching the direction of my attention, The way the conveyors seemed to adjust their distant hum when I stopped and listened. It wasn't a gaze. It was a process tracking input. I turned and walked quickly, then faster when I heard the ticking again. Tick. Pause. Tick. It came from behind me, then to my left, then ahead, moving without footsteps, repositioning as if the sound itself was being placed where it could steer me. I broke into a run. The corridor lights came on in segments as I passed, flattening the space, making it hard to judge where the next turn was. My breath grew loud in my ears. My bag thumped against my hip with the weight of the retrieved logger, and that small weight began to feel like a tether. I ran through a doorway and found myself in a loading bay. For a split second I thought I had made it out. The bay had a high roll-up door and a slice of daylight spilling in from a gap at the bottom. The concrete floor was scuffed and stained like a real working space. There were pallet jacks and stacks of wrapped freight. The smell was different too, a mix of oil and damp cardboard. It felt like relief. Then I saw that every wrapped pallet in the bay had the sticker symbol on the stretch film, each one placed at about eye level. Not random. Not accidental. A consistent height, as if to meet my gaze. I walked to the roll-up door and crouched, trying to see outside through the gap. The light beyond was too bright to resolve details at first. My eyes adjusted slowly. I expected to see the yard, the rail lines, the distant fence, the parked trailers. Instead I saw another loading bay. Same concrete. Same pallet jacks. Same stacks of freight. Same slice of daylight bleeding under another roll-up door. It was as if the annex had built a copy of an exit and placed it behind the real one, endlessly. A sound behind me made me turn. The ticking had become a soft, rapid series, like a scanner reading something over and over. It wasn't coming from a handheld device. It was in the bay itself, in the air near the wrapped pallets. I moved between stacks, looking for a place to hide, because my body had accepted that hiding was now part of the job. Behind a tall pallet of shrink-wrapped boxes was a narrow gap between two stacks and the wall. I squeezed into it and pulled my bag close, trying to reduce my outline. The plastic wrap brushed my shoulder and made a faint crackle that sounded too loud. I held my breath. The scanning ticks moved closer, then stopped. For a long moment there was nothing but the distant conveyor hum, slow and patient, like the building's pulse. Then something on the other side of the pallet shifted, very slightly. Not the pallet moving. The tension in the stretch film changing, like a hand had pressed into it and released. The plastic crinkled once, softly. I stared at the clear film, watching for a deformation, a shadow, anything that could tell me if a person was there. The boxes behind it were uniform, printed with the same generic shipping marks. The film reflected light in thin lines. In the reflection, for an instant, I saw a shape that wasn't mine. Not a face. Not a body. Just a vertical distortion, like heat over asphalt, aligned with the gap where I was hiding. It held still while I held still, then slid sideways out of the reflection without making any sound. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I didn't wait for it to come back. I pushed out of the gap and ran again, not caring where the corridor led as long as it was away from the bay. The building rewarded my panic with more corridors. I passed a door with a narrow window and saw a room full of shelves. On one shelf were dozens of data loggers, the same model as mine, arranged in neat rows. Each one had the sticker symbol on its casing. Each one blinked at a slightly different interval, like a room full of slow eyes. I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. The corridor ended in the fire door with the original sticker. The same dull silver square. The same cut circle. The same 3 dots. For a moment I felt dizzy, like I'd been spun. I looked behind me, expecting to see the endless hall and cages. I did see them, but they looked flatter now, like a backdrop. I put my hand on the fire door. The metal was cold. The sticker flashed in the daylight, as if pleased to be seen again. I opened it. On the other side was the annex corridor I'd started in. The off-white walls. The high windows. the faint smell of new rubber, the scuff on the baseboard. My heart hammered. Relief surged hot and sharp, almost painful in my chest. I stepped through and let the door swing closed behind me. The latch clicked. The click sounded normal. Beautifully normal. I walked fast toward the exterior exit, not daring to look back. I could see daylight at the end of the corridor, the glass doors leading out to the yard. Halfway there, my bag vibrated against my hip. A soft, steady pulse. Not a phone. The retrieved logger. I stopped and unzipped the bag with shaking hands. The device sat inside, screen lit. The temperature reading was steady. Below it, in smaller characters, was a field I hadn't noticed before. It wasn't an alarm. It wasn't an error. It was just a calm line of information, as if it had always been part of its function. It displayed a number sequence that made my stomach drop because it was too close to my life to be coincidence. It was my employee ID, the one printed on my badge. I stared at it until the digits blurred. When I finally looked away, I realized my badge felt different against my chest. Heavier, as if something had been added. I pulled it up and saw, on the plastic sleeve, a small silver sticker. The cut circle and 3 dots. My hands went numb. I tried to peel it off. The edge wouldn't lift. It wasn't stuck on the surface. It was sealed beneath, as if it had been laminated into the badge when it was made. I kept moving, because standing still felt like agreeing. The exterior doors opened when I pushed them. Cold air hit my face. Real air, with the smell of diesel and distant snow. The yard spread out under a pale sky. The rail lines glinted. The fence stood where it should. I stepped out into the light and felt it on my skin like a weight lifting. Then I heard the conveyor sound. Not behind me in the building. Not muffled through walls. It was beneath my feet, faint but present, a slow rolling hum that seemed to come from the concrete yard itself, as if the process extended beyond the annex. I looked down at the ground. Near the threshold, on the concrete, someone had pressed a sticker symbol into the dust with a finger, the cut circle and 3 dots traced in a thin, clean line. The dust around it was undisturbed, as if the symbol had formed without anyone stepping there. I looked back at the glass doors. Through them I could see the corridor, bright and clean, nothing moving. On the glass, at about eye level, was a dull silver square that hadn't been there when I came out. It caught the daylight and flashed. I walked away anyway, because walking away is what you do when you can still pretend you have a choice. As I crossed the yard toward my van, my phone buzzed again. This time there was a notification. A new job assignment, routed through dispatch, with the same bland formatting as always. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. The retrieved logger in my bag pulsed once more, steady and patient, like it was counting something. I could feel the vibration through the nylon, through my jacket, through my ribs. I reached my van, unlocked it, and climbed inside. The cab smelled like old coffee and vinyl, familiar enough to make my eyes sting. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and tried to calm my breathing. The yard outside was bright and still. The fence stood firm. The annex doors looked normal from this distance, just glass and aluminum and clean lines. I told myself I would drive away and never come back. I told myself I would drop the logger at dispatch, quit the contract, tell someone in authority that something was wrong with the annex. Then I realized I didn't know which direction was out. Not because the yard had changed. Because the roads beyond the fence looked subtly unfamiliar, as if the depot had been placed in a similar yard somewhere else. The same kind of snow piles. The same gray warehouses. The same tracks. My mirrors reflected the yard behind me, but the reflection felt delayed by a fraction, like it took a moment for the light to decide what to show. I looked at my badge again. The sticker under the plastic caught the light and flashed in the same way as the one on the fire door. In my bag, the logger gave one more steady pulse. I sat very still, listening. Under the ordinary yard sounds, under the distant engine noise and the wind against the fence, the faint conveyor hum continued, slow and patient, like a system that didn't care whether I understood it. It sounded like the building had never let go. It sounded like it had simply moved the process forward one step, and now it was waiting for me to do the same.